about people that come to Oak Ridge and are considered as criminally insane, and people look at them or think of them as people that they're supposed to be locked up in cages and, are supposed to be tied up to the walls by chains and stuff like that. They're going to jump on people as soon as you jump in here or whatever. That's not the case.
It's not easy knowing that you're a violent person. I was a violent person. I think I have the potential of being a violent person again. I think everybody has that, though.
Like people out there, I don't think realize that that we have as much freedom, yet as much security as we have in here, treating each other.
Everybody realizes after they get here for a while that you can't run. There's no point in running. You got to face every problem that comes up. You can't put any of them off. You gotta do the painful thing before you get better.
Oak Ridge, a maximum security hospital for male patients operating under the Mental Health Center in Penetanguishene, Ontario. Almost all of its patients come from other institutions: the courts, federal and provincial correctional facilities, county jails, regional psychiatric hospitals, and mental retardation facilities. The need for maximum security makes the physical aspect of Oak Ridge resemble that of a penitentiary more than that of a hospital. But this is where the similarity ends. Organizationally, Oak Ridge is divided into 3 divisions: activity treatment, forensic assessment, and social therapy. The Activity Treatment Unit, or the ATU, consists of 4 wards housing about 150 patients and is best equipped to treat patients not well suited for verbal forms of therapy. Its programs are based upon security and behavior modification principles, as Dr. Marnie Rice explains.
What this means is that rather than try and deal with such things as insight, trying to get at deeper aspects of the patient, we operate on the principle that a patient is here because of his behavior, that there are inappropriate aspects to his behavior, and we try and deal specifically with changing that behavior so that for example, if a patient comes because he's been assaultive at another hospital, we'll try and deal with his assaultiveness, and we won't worry about whether he's got insight as to why he was assaultive and what caused this behavior. We're more interested in just dealing with the assaultiveness itself, and if we get rid of that, we consider that we've cured the patient as far as his dangerousness is concerned. When a patient first comes to the admission ward, we get all the necessary admission documentation, and then the patient will be given a little booklet which will explain the programs that he will be expected to go into on our unit. He'll be told, for example, that he's going to have to earn points to get various privileges. He's told that he'll get points every day for keeping his room tidy, for dressing neatly, for helping out with the ward work in the mornings, maybe points for doing special ward work during the day. He'll get points for attending the ward meeting once a week, and for being for his mood and cooperation, he'll get points for that. He'll also get points for showing interest in other patients, talking with other patients, and he'll also be told that he can lose points for undesirable behaviors, and he's given a list of all the things he can lose points for. Some of the things that he can lose points for are stealing, getting into a fight, attempting escape, possessing a weapon, and various less serious offenses. The atmosphere here is totally different, I think, from that in a correctional facility. The attendants here are seen as, I think, mostly as friends of the patients. There's not the patients or the inmates in a correctional facility versus the guards.
So you worry about restraining a patient, whether you're doing it right, whether worry about him hurting you or you hurting him, and reports have to be written up later, and was it justified, and how can it be prevented, things like this.
Here it's the patients and the attendants working together to solve the problems, I think. Also, I think our patients are more seriously disturbed psychiatrically than a prison population, so they're less able to kind of gang up and get together as a group to plan things. I think this helps us on our unit.
You get to know your patients, and you know each one as an individual if you work on a ward long enough. And you can, if that patient's acting up, you know, or if he's just not quite on the ball, you know there's something wrong. You can sense something wrong usually before something happens.
Just generally, the whole atmosphere is more like a hospital than they all know that they do have problems with their behavior, that they're here to work on those, rather than that they're here for punishment.
If you see one slipping, he gets less privileges, and if he continues to slip, well, he gets semi-confined. Whereas if he had full privileges and he's out all the time, something's liable to happen. Somebody's liable to get hurt. But if you see this man slipping, if you catch it, if you talk to him, you know, maybe by dropping him a few cards or taking away a few privileges, it's not liable to happen.
The patients who've had special difficulty working through the program on the admission ward will be put into a more individual type of program where the staff will be specifically working on just one behavior with those patients. For example, a patient who's had difficulty because he gets into a lot of fights will probably be in a special program where they're just working on trying to decrease the amount of fights that patient gets into. Some of our patients have difficulty because they're just not motivated to do anything. Those patients, too, will be on a special program where they'll get rewards for doing, for doing any activity if that's their special problem. On the second ward, what we're really looking for is to decrease the amount of antisocial behavior. We don't really care if a patient is still quite psychotic. The psychotic patients are patients who are the most seriously psychiatrically disturbed. Most of these patients, at least in the acute phase of psychosis, have lost contact with reality. Many of our psychotic patients are what is known as paranoid schizophrenic. They might be, when they arrive, they might believe that they're God, or believe that their mind is being controlled by people from outer space, or something such as this. Many of them have some very specific delusions about what's happening, when in fact none of it is happening at all. We don't really care if a patient is still quite psychotic, as long as he's not causing problems that would be considered to be dangerous behaviors. As long as he can refrain from those behaviors, he'll be able to be considered for transfer to one of the lower wards. By the lower wards, I mean wards that are a little less secure. The security is not quite so tight. The rooms are a little more open. Patients can have more of their own personal belongings in their rooms. The staff are just generally less uptight about letting these patients have a bit more freedom. When a patient first comes down to one of the lower wards, he will go in again a point economy similar to the ones upstairs, except that they concentrate more on social behaviors. Upstairs, we're mostly working on eliminating the antisocial behavior. When he gets to the lower ward, we're more interested in teaching him and giving him the social skills that he's going to need to function outside of the hospital without getting into trouble again. And this all happens on the lower ward because we feel more comfortable about having them in a group privately with professional staff, with no attendant staff around. We can't kind of do this until we've eliminated their aggressive behaviors to the point where we feel comfortable putting them in a group alone with professional staff. As they work through the program on the first of the lower wards that they come to, they'll get up to a level which was called self-assessment. And on this level, the patients begin to mark their own behaviors and assign their own points with just periodic checks by staff to make sure that they're giving themselves reasonable marks.
Well, Morris, I want to do your assessment.
No.
You have a clean-looking toilet, eh?
No.
Your bed's nicely made. You clean underneath it today? Yeah, it looks pretty good.
This is training for them to, a gradual progression to self-control where they control their own behavior.
Everything? What about yourself?
Pretty good.
What do you think you deserve today for your
4-4.
4-4, right? Well, I think that's quite reasonable. Yeah, we'll give them 4-4.
If they manage for about 4 weeks on self-assessment, they'll then go on to non-program status. And this means that they're taken off the point economy altogether and are just monitoring their own behavior. Patients at this upper level would be getting all the privileges that we're able to offer in this hospital. They get special privileges such as making toast and coffee for themselves in the evening, going to all the volunteer activities, going on outside bus and swim trips. That's about the limit of what we're able to offer. One of the privileges that we're quite happy that we're able to offer the patients is going to the activity center in the day. This is an area where patients are able to participate in various craft activities, in simple woodworking or furniture refinishing, or a contract area where they're able to earn money performing fairly simple factory type of jobs. The security is a little less tight in this area, and we're able to see how they interact with there are more female staff there for them to interact with, and this is an important area of their assessment. This area is used both, again, as an assessment area and as a treatment area. We do have a number of patients that are here on warrants of the Lieutenant Governor, and these patients very, very often are our very best patients, and they'll work quite quickly through all of our programs, but their discharge is not up to the treatment staff of this hospital, or at least not totally up to us. Instead, they're reviewed every year by what is called the Advisory Review Board. And the Advisory Review Board will make a recommendation to the Lieutenant Governor as to whether or not this patient should be released. Very often we'll say that, well, we've done all that we can for this patient and he's worked through our programs, but as the public is not ready to have this person who's committed in most cases a very serious offense. The public is not ready to have this person back in the community. And so the Advisory Review Board will recommend that we keep him for another year, and sometimes another year and another year. And they're basically just occupying a bed here until the Advisory Review Board sees fit to loosen that warrant. Most of the public believe that this is an institution for the criminally insane and have visions of our patients being all, I think they imagine that they're all murderers and very dangerous people that you wouldn't want to even, that you'd be risking your life to even go near. In fact, when people actually come and see and talk to our patients, they almost invariably say, well, these patients don't seem dangerous at all, and they're not at all like they've imagined.
A patient advises how to stay out of trouble.
I think they should pack a lunch pail and go to work instead, try to get into trouble. This is not a good place. It's not good for your record. Not even good for yourself or your family.
You got a family?
Me? No, but I got 15 brothers and 2 sisters.
They visit you?
Yeah, they came up twice so far.
What's it feel like?
The first time, I felt a little bit embarrassed to let them see me in here, I didn't want them to know that I was in here. I think one of the doctors wrote them a letter and told them that I was here. And surprised me, Now, I'm glad that he did it,
under certain circumstances, our patients can be dangerous. For example, some patients might be especially sensitive to teasing, for example. Some of our less intelligent patients just don't know how to react to a tease. For example, someone will say, "You're a creep," and that'll be enough to just set them off and you know, hit the nearest person to them at the time. Or they'll be told to do something and they don't want to do it, and rather than verbally answer back that they don't want to do it, they'll just hit the person that happens to be there. So they can be dangerous, and many of them could be quite dangerous out on the street. For example, our child molesters and rapists and this are an arsonist, but their dangerous behaviors can't be exhibited in this institution just because there aren't children or very many women, or there's no matches around for them to set fires.
And finally, when any major changes are proposed or made that affect the patient's status, they generally occur during the ATU clinical meetings. Another important program at Oak Ridge is aimed at those adults who direct overt sexual behaviors towards children, child molesters. Dr. Vern Quincy explains.
Yes, quite often, particularly in the federal penitentiary system, child molesters, not all of them, but many of them are the lowest in the pecking order, and they have a lot of abuse. We don't have many of those sorts of problems here. And we've been, I think, largely because we don't have a correctional atmosphere here. You know, we don't have a lot of clique formation, particularly in the activity treatment unit. That's jailhousey in attitude. Well, there's no case that I'm aware of where a person's been abused by other patients here because he was a child molester. Child molesting, I think, is much more common than most people think. It involves probably a lot less damage to the child. You know, most of the interactions. Most child molesters are relatively harmless. If they get caught, they're very likely not to recidivate, particularly first offenders. So there are many of them who are, particularly the ones we don't tend to see here, like the one-time offenders, have a very good track record with respect to future recidivism. So I think that the public has a stereotype that's really inaccurate concerning the child molester. They see them as dirty, old, dangerous men. And in fact, most of them are not old and not very dangerous.
From the courts come those found not guilty by reason of insanity, those found unfit to stand trial, and those remanded for 30 and 60-day periods of observation. It is with the latter that the Forensic Assessment Unit is most concerned. The newest facility at Oak Ridge, it was formed in response to the increasing demand by the courts of Ontario for psychiatric assessment of people facing charges. This facility, physically operating on both sides of the hospital, has a very limited number of beds. The patient undergoes a great deal of psychological testing, as well as the standard medical routine, which includes X-rays, particularly skull X-rays, and brainwave tracing. The unit consists of 2 doctors who, in addition to assessing, spend a great deal of their time in the courts, giving evidence on the patients they've assessed. There are also 2 social worker historians who compile social histories of the patients. Here is Dr. Russell Fleming.
Usually the issues are simple ones, really. There's nothing very complicated about it. We express opinions on issues such as fitness to stand trial, the possible application of insanity as a defense, and suitability of a person for bail. We routinely make opinions on those 3 areas. We may also, in a large number of cases, have things to say about what sort of future the person may have psychiatrically, whether they're in need of further psychiatric treatment, and if so, what kind of treatment and where that might be received. We're also concerned in a large number of cases with assessing or trying to assess the degree of dangerousness this person may present mainly to other people. And we're usually thinking of dangerousness in terms of a physical dangerousness, how likely he is to hurt somebody or kill somebody. That's mainly what we're concerned with in terms of dangerousness. That essentially describes what happens in a usual assessment. There are some exceptions to that scheme. In a certain number of situations, perhaps 10% of the people we see, the patient will have very obvious and serious mental disorder. Even at the time of admission or shortly thereafter, it'll be apparent that the person is severely sick and is really in need of treatment rather more than assessment. Now, we tend to stick fairly strictly to the rule that we don't treat patients here for assessment. We don't force treatment on people who are here from the courts because we believe we don't have the right to do that. And that, in fact, if we did, they potentially could take some legal action against us for having done that. But when we do see a person who is severely ill, we may make an arrangement with the court to certify that person mentally ill under the Mental Health Act and proceed with whatever treatment we feel is necessary. That's what usually happens in the case of an acute, for example, an acute schizophrenic who is really quite floridly psychotic and in need of treatment fairly urgently. In those situations, that patient may remain here longer, in some cases much longer than the period of the assessment or the original warrant, the 30 or 60 days. And most of the courts are quite agreeable in that regard. We inform them at some later time when the person is recovered and able to stand his trial, and then the person is then returned to the court. That's the one major exception to the usual way the assessment is carried out.
The third division of the hospital, the Social Therapy Unit, or the STU, consists of another 4 wards housing about 150 men, mostly in their early 20s. With average or above average intelligence, the STU patient responds to a different kind of therapy. The unit is based upon the philosophy that mental illness is a direct result of a person's inability to communicate. Therefore, social therapy involves reestablishing or strengthening the dialogue between the patient and others.
It's hard to say what a nut is, you know, like you can't, like, maybe he's your next door neighbor, you know, you can't really pinpoint a nut, because I was normal, and I flew off the handle, and now I'm in here doing what I can to get better.
So the people that they're saying, oh, lock him up, get rid of him, he's no good, could be the guy right next door, or the girl you're expressing it to, or the mother that you're saying, look at this. It could be them. It could be them. They don't know that. Like, they seem to think, rapist. They try to picture a rapist, a murderer. How's a rapist or a murderer look?
Get discouraged once in a while. You know, it seems like forever you're going to be here. In the future, it's so indefinite. You don't know if you're going to leave tomorrow or 6 months or whenever. The hospital's got that whole, you know, it's the strings of the bag. They can just tighten them every time. Eh? You think you're getting out, and all things say, well, you know, I don't think you're ready. You know, and you get false hopes, but you can't help that. It's impossible to get your hopes up when your parole starts coming up.
My sole purpose in being here, so to speak, within my own judgment, has been to take therapy, learn about myself, correct whatever problems I have.
So I learned that in the last couple of years, the easiest thing you can do is sort of learn about yourself and the people around you. And if you learn about them and yourself, then you'll learn about the world outside too.
I can really feel like I'm getting better. And I can feel it when we have visitors come and I talk to them. I feel myself getting inspired, you know, that things are good here because it's positive. It's not negative like it was sitting in a hole in Kingston with nothing to look forward to but another 5 years sitting in that same room, and it's just wide enough to walk between the bed and the wall. Like there's nothing else. It's just a toilet at the end of the bed, and that's it, you know. There was nothing. Nobody to talk to, no reading, no program, no nothing. Here, you know, you've got a program that takes you through every day, and you barely find time to think, actually, about, well, let's call it dwell on problems, you know. You really don't have time to dwell on problems. What you do is you get to the root of problems, and you're into that, and you're watching and learning about other people's behavior all the time. A lady asked us today, a visitor today, asked if we were interested, if we got bored, you know. And I just sat there, and I had never thought of it, you know, because there's always something happening with somebody out of the 24 people in the community. Something's always happening, and it just doesn't happen that there's a boring time, you know. Sometimes you feel lonely. Of course, you always feel lonely if you're away from the people you really care about. But that's the only problem, really. And then the problem of facing up to yourself is quite painful, so you get distracted by that sometimes.
Dr. Douglas Tate.
Everyone who comes here has had a history to some degree of not coping well in terms of their relations with other people. In other words, they've developed unsatisfactory ways of relating to the people around them. Usually it begins early in life, and it usually involves the family, particularly the parents. And the person may have had difficulties also in terms of his school, his friends, and his peer group, and later in his work, his ability to get a job and hold it and get along with the people that he works with. And so when a person arrives here, this is usually clearly there in their history. And the fact that they're here usually also means that they have at one time or another been a danger to other people or to themselves. And the purpose of the social therapy unit is to provide a lifestyle that focuses on the person's social behavior.
I've had a lot of good feelings over the period that I've been here about coming here. When I first came to the hospital, even before that, I had known that I had problems that needed attention, that I didn't have all the necessaries to work out those problems myself. And so I was gung-ho to get into therapy, try to find out something about myself. And it has benefited me greatly being in therapy. I have a lot of good feelings for several of the programs I've been in. The medical staff that's the psychiatric staff that's administered them, looked after us during those periods, and there's been a lot of good things happen to me while I've been at Oak Ridge.
The fundamental difference in the operation of the STU is that with professional direction and staff assistance, the patient becomes the therapist by being actively and continuously engaged in the treatment of his fellow patient.
There are a number of functions on the social therapy unit which are performed by patients rather than staff. And some of these are that the cafeteria is manned predominantly by patients. The assessment groups are taught by patients. The MAP groups are run by patients. The F-Ward program often has need of observers to watch other patients when they're in the total encounter capsule or while they are in a drug treatment or following a drug treatment. And we have 2 full-time patient observers who perform that function. We also have our own television and videotape equipment, and we often make videotapes of the drug treatments for the purpose of showing them to the patient and his group 1 or 2 days later. Patients are responsible for the television aspect of our programs as well.
One of the founders of the social therapy program, Dr. E.F. Barker.
In the first 2 or 3 years in the original G-Ward program, it wasn't always exciting for everybody. I mean, there was lots of the humdrum, but basically there were a lot of people that had a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of forward-looking, and they were very close to what they had come from, the earlier hospital existence, and feeling that they were really into something new. Dr. Boyd used to quip that we all thought everybody was going to get cured next month. And in a sense, that's true.
Everyone who comes to the unit starts out by being admitted to the assessment ward, and they enter into the assessment program. The assessment program is not designed to treat any particular problem or illness, but is merely designed to provide a situation in which the person can sort of display himself and how he responds to stress and demands that are placed upon him.
Sort of in that trip where I want to impress people, play the part of a solid, and I found people don't go in for that kind of bullshit, and they quickly told me that, quick let me know how they felt about that, and as a result, if I didn't catch on fast enough, I started learning through sanctions and that.
Patients fresh from the prison subculture can create a disruptive effect on the social community. So the assessment ward consists of a pre-treatment training program that minimizes this. Almost every day is supervised by teachers who are patients themselves, and new admissions must learn that they're in a mental hospital and that the prison ethic is out of place here.
There's no communication with anybody because I don't really know why there's no communication. I think it's just a rule, but a lot of people say they don't want any personal problems involved. But you got to be quiet all the time, and the way you get your lights for your cigarettes is a guy goes down the corridor like this, snapping his lighter back and forth like that, you know, and you listen for this sound, you stick your cigarette out the screen, and he comes up and goes.
One of the sad things is as you work here, and particularly the kind of work I've been doing the last few years, examining patients from the court, is that we have relatively very few treatment beds here, where we can take a patient who we feel might benefit from these programs and give them the experience here. We're turning people away to the prisons who we think should be involved in a program like this, either in the prisons or here. Part of that problem is increasing because a lot of the admissions here are not optional for the hospital. They're warrants to the Lieutenant Governor, not guilty by reason of insanity. Many of them are inappropriate patients to be in a hospital at all, let alone this particular hospital, but we can't do anything about it. And they, in a sense, simply subtract one bed from your treatment resource. Because either the Crown Attorney was too lazy to prosecute vigorously and had a chance of getting a cheap Section 16, which parked the guy away from the Crown's point of view, out of society for a reasonable length of time. And they won't listen to our arguments. You're stealing a treatment bed from Ontario. That's a crime. See, the lawyer involved, he thinks it's a goodie if he can get his guy in here. He's not worried about down the line or who he's stealing a bed from. He doesn't care. Crown Attorney in some of these cheap Section 16 doesn't care either. He's getting a guy locked up. We squawk, but we're biased. You know, it's our place. What are you squawking about? I mean, sure you squawk. So we resent that kind of thing. And you get a guy parked here for 2, 3, 5 years, you're just subtracting a treatment bed.
The social therapy wards operate on two basic systems: a bureaucratic pattern, adapting well to patients reluctant to cooperate with peers and the establishment, and a tribal pattern, structured to accommodate those more motivated patients who already understand the ground rules. Both systems involve intensive group therapy.
One of the interesting things is there's never been a great push by the patients to get outside reading material, to be puzzled about world affairs, to be debating that. Sometimes lawyers come in and they think we've restricted the stuff that the patients are allowed because they're not interested in that. They're interested in the feelings of the people around them for them and their feelings for them, which is what most of us outside aren't interested in. There's much more that's crowded into our world that takes that place.
You can withdraw for a while, but people get onto you. I mean, you can lose yourself in a book, you know, but that's only after lockup. And if you want to fantasize a bit and ride across the range in a Western novel, you can. Nobody's saying you can't, but it's a thing that everybody realizes after they get here for a while, that you can't run.
Some forms of therapy used on the STU are dyads, triads, group meetings, ward meetings, MAP, drug treatment, and the total encounter capsule.
A dyad is merely the pairing of two patients together, and they meet every day for 1 hour, and there's no agenda. They talk about whatever comes to mind and whatever is sort of foremost in their minds at the time, the things that are bothering them, and so on. It's often a very therapeutic situation. You may have two patients who really are very similar in some ways, but don't realize it. And in the course of meeting together for an hour a day and talking to each other over a period of weeks and months, they often come to learn. They can see and anticipate in the other person's what the other person's saying, because they start to see that they feel and do and think the same things themselves. The problems that the individual might have that would be upsetting to the rest of the ward are really laid in the lap of his group, and they are responsible to try to figure out what should be done about it. They're responsible to confront the individual if he is trying to avoid the issue. They are also responsible to support him if he requires support and needs it and is not getting it. So the group is a larger situation than the dyad, but it's not so big that the individual and his own problems and feelings could get lost. The group is designed to be the sort of the workhorse of the therapy program, and most of the time it works that way. Any of the sort of decision making that the patients do goes on in a group situation, and the patients draw up recommendations to pass along to the staff in the hospital.
First, I should make clear that the staff have final say to anything we decide, and then from there it still has to go down to professional staff to decide. Like, they can overrule the staff on the ward, and staff can overrule us.
Communication is the critical element in the success of the social therapy program, and the role of patient moderator courier is part of it.
They're a liaison between the staff and the patients and the staff. We report the news, the happenings of the ward, and we're the communication gap. Really, we close the communication gap between the staff and the patients. That's about all we do. It's our responsibility to feed back everything that happens, both ways, you know.
The ward meeting is really an interesting forum. One of its primary functions is to communicate to everybody on the ward, the entire community, what has gone on in the groups and so on, and to make some final decisions as to what should be done about it. So the group might discuss a problem with one of the patients and make a recommendation. The summary of their discussion and their recommendation would be presented at the ward meeting, and the entire ward would then discuss it even further and take a vote upon what should be done.
I think if people could communicate openly with each other, with their feelings, right, you'd have a lot less problems. Like, I think the most guys that grow up, sort of the male image is to hold back their feelings, to not, it's sort of considered feminine to express pain, hurt, a lot of that, hate, the need for love, attention, and a lot of guys can't describe that, right? Or can't express that. They hold that in, and that's where a lot of problems are caused. They can't talk about their feelings and emotions, and if they get caught up in them, they have nowhere to turn to relieve that. And I think it's where a lot of crimes happen. A lot of people get screwed up because you can't communicate with one another.
We also use 4 other different drug treatments to help patients to get beyond initial defenses that they have, which prevent them from experiencing their own emotions. The thing about emotions is that they're very often painful to experience, and it's very common that we repress and inhibit our emotional responses. And this may enable us to do things that we wouldn't ordinarily do, because we would respond emotionally to them and feel very uncomfortable and unhappy as a result. So many of the fellows that are here have arrived at a point where they are relatively out of touch with most of their emotional feelings, with the possible exception of anger. And we use some drugs periodically in special situations to disrupt the person's defenses and prevent him from inhibiting his own emotional life and to prevent him also at a more intellectual level to rationalize his behavior to those around him.
If a person's had problems with alcohol in the past, we can give them for that reason. There's been people that have killed under the influence of alcohol. They can't remember anything. There's some guys that just go berserk on alcohol. Under any other circumstances, they're just perfectly normal. We give them a shot of liquor and they go crazy. They want to pick fights, etc. We want to gain more insight into that. So we give them an alcohol treatment. And that's all taped, videotaped. And so that way the person can see himself afterwards, after a nice juicy hangover for a couple of days. He can see himself, what he's like under the influence of alcohol. And well, I guess that's one of the best teachers it is, because he can't deny anything.
It's a therapeutic setting. You just don't come in and get drunk. You're supposed to be working on your problems. And things that come out of it, it's all videoed. And guys usually make it to the 6 or 7 glasses, and then they're crunched.
Each ward has its own patient security team, and they are responsible to carry out the various procedures that are mandatory on the ward to ensure that nobody gets hurt and that the drug treatment or whatever is ongoing is secure. There are 7 patients on each of these teams. They are assigned to this duty as a function of their level of responsibility and the fact that the rest of the patients on the ward have confidence in them. They are required to carry out their responsibilities, and they are subject to being sanctioned if they don't. And they are observed by the attendance staff who have the responsibility for security as well, to make sure that they do their job.
I guess all I can say is I feed them, give them showers, make sure their beds are made, put them to bed, etc. Make sure they're clean. There's quite a great deal of responsibility involved. I have to be there at certain times, and I have to make sure that, if they lose their heads, I still have mine. And it does take a lot of patience when it comes to, talking to psychotics, because sometimes they don't even understand where you're coming from.
One of the more innovative techniques that we've developed over the years, and that was originally suggested by a patient, is the use of supportive restraints. And these consist of cotton straps, which can be used to tie a patient's wrists together so that he is unable to act out on anyone around him or to harm himself. And then we also attach these cuffs to another patient so that somebody will be with the upset patient at all times to look after him and to talk to him.
We went through a second generation, we're into a third generation now, and I'd like to think that what that means is that the structures of the way the wards are operating, the kinds of committee system and the kinds of things you see on F ward, that pattern is established enough and carries itself not independent of a particular unit director, but to a large extent, and the place doesn't fall apart, as a particular leader leaves. That's quite an exciting thing for in the field of therapeutic communities.
I never had any security in my life, nothing I could really count on. And after a while, it just, I was the only one in my life that kept me from doing things wrong. Then I decided one day not to bother, and the result was drastic. So, it's kind of nice to know that there's something there, that even if I get in the most negative headspace I could possibly get into, frame of mind, nothing's going to happen. Because all I have to do is tell somebody. All I have to do is ask people to listen to me, and they will. And if I can't even do that, well, it's just a matter of someone else seeing it in me and calling for help, and it'll all be taken care of. That security is something I can't explain to somebody who doesn't need it, I guess. It's just there.
any patient who demonstrates clearly to those around him that he is not motivated to change himself, that he has a negative attitude about social therapy and the people around him, and that he's unwilling to participate or obey the rules, is eligible to go to the MAP program. Normally, MAP is used as a last resort, and a patient is only transferred to the MAP program if he has consistently or severely provoked those around him, and if he has disrupted the regular ongoing therapy program to the point where everybody is trying to treat him and to the detriment of everybody else.
As a step towards the eventual reintegration into society, some of the patients on the social therapy unit are engaged in industrial therapy.
The industrial therapy ward is designed to replicate normal Canadian lifestyle in the sense that the patients spend their day working in various shops in the building. We have an industrial therapy shop where we build various wooden platforms. We make baseballs. We have an upholstery shop and wood and furniture refinishing shop and so on. The ward is also designed as a therapeutic community, but the focus, rather than being on dyads and groups and ward meetings, is mainly on normal 7-hour workday. However, the problems that arise on the ward are solved, or at least coordinated by a patient committee called the Central Committee.
Once again, Dr. Fleming about assessment.
As far as the future is concerned, we'd like to become a little more discriminating, if we could, about the kind of people who come here. We've now come to recognize that we can't continue with our present resources to handle the number of people that we're being asked to see, because I think that we do see large numbers of people that could have been just as well assessed in another setting. And I think, in a way, for our peace of mind, it's perhaps the best that some of them would be assessed elsewhere.
And as for the future,
the guys here, almost all of them will be leaving the hospital. Almost all of them will be improving. They'll be going to some other facility. Some will go out into the street and will do well the rest of their lives. They'll overcome their handicap. They won't be as good as they might have been. They won't be as effective in achieving what they want to achieve because of the early limitations.
And the patient's thoughts for the future.
Strangely enough, I think of quiet things. I think of just being with my family, and like, I don't have a girlfriend or anything like that, but it won't take me very long to get one. Not too long at all. But the thing is, I'm a fisherman. I've been fishing nuts since I was a kid, and I'd like to go fishing, really, with my family, or like, we got a cottage on the lake, so I can just go out in front of the cottage and fish, you know, get some good pickerel. But that's what I look forward to. I look forward to the lake. And in the winter, if it's the winter time when I get out, I look forward to skiing, you know. I just want to do the things that I've always wanted to do, and I've never really had the chance to do them all. You know, but I want to be a very quiet individual. I don't want to be a drunken rowdy or anything like this. I want to be a kind of a guy that'll be easy to live with.
I think it's clearer to me now than when I first got interested in establishing a society for the prevention of cruelty to children, that it's been the influence of patients here who I've come to know and like a great deal, and to have a feeling for the depth of their illness, you know, that in spite of years of intensive treatment, it doesn't budge a great deal. That's made me want to get back to those early formative years, which generally are underplayed in our society for their crucial importance in the later development of the kinds of problems that you get with patients here. You know, we're more concerned about a first-class hockey player than a first-class mother. That's wrong. That's crazy when you end up with this kind of institution as a result. Now, that's an overall statement. Not everybody here is here because they were abused in the first 2 years of life. But it's by no means a minor problem in my estimation. In basic terms, it's my belief that a patient should spend as much time in the process of rehabilitation as he spent here, full time. If he was here 5 years, he should be 5 years in the process of gradually reintegrating into society. 2 years here, 2 years out. The same manpower, the same money, the same energy, the same emotional investment of staff should go to that following rehabilitation period, and it doesn't. It's much more haphazard.
One of the most remarkable things at Oak Ridge is the relationship existing between patient and staff.
I couldn't talk to the staff when I first came in because I was so paranoid that something would happen. And it got to the point where staff kept following me around, like the ward supervisor here and another staff member in particular that kept following me around everywhere I went, until I got to the point where, I felt like I was being a kind of a fool for not talking to them and not trusting them because they weren't doing me any harm. So I eventually did turn around and start talking to them, and they made me feel so much at ease because they understood that I was at the bottom of my rope by being in here, and that I had nowhere left to go, and that I'd been rejected and things like that, and they understood exactly what I was talking about, and they offered me a lot of very good advice. And to me, that was one of the most worthwhile things that I've ever experienced since I've been in the hospital.
One of the things that's different about this style of therapeutic community from many, if not most others, is that the attendant staff remain a part of the ongoing therapy. Perhaps not so much so as they did in my early days. That's shifted somewhat. But one of the strengths of that is that the attendants, by being available as models for the patients to pattern themselves after and to identify with. I think we underestimate that, or we tend to, and the attendants have a very difficult job. They're underpaid for what they're doing. They're the backbone of the program. They're not generally in the forefront. They're not seen. They're crucial to the program.
When I was in the penitentiary, if you are seen talking to a staff, or I don't call them staffs there, but if you get caught talking to one of the staff there, people become very suspicious of you, and they think that you're an informer or something, and which usually has very violent repercussions. You're confronted by maybe 4 or 5 people with, for instance, pipes or knives or something like that. And it's not a very nice situation. I've seen guys killed in there, and for very little reasons, for reasons in my mind that were completely unjustified.
The patients don't deteriorate here, and I think people do in prison. They develop a prison illness in about 2 years, which they never get over. As one of the patients here said, that in prison one lounges through a perpetual coffee break, swapping lies about past and planned antisocial acts. And patients don't do that here, and I think that's a very real plus. Now, those 3 things are a plus. They aren't getting worse. They aren't deteriorating the way I think prisons basically influence people. The morale is better and the security is better. Do we cure people? Is our cure rate high is the other question. Well, clearly there are people who have been through the programs here and gotten into further difficulty. We know that. I don't think in the early years I expected anyone to ever do anything but go ever onwards and upwards. And that was part of my enthusiasm and the patients as well. Realistically, there are, I don't know if there's any program that can do that. I don't think, the 3 things I've mentioned stand and have stood for 10 years. And other places can't say that. The experts seem to be locked on the cure rate and seem to miss those 3 elements as being quite enough to warrant the establishment of programs similar to this, at least in parts of the prison system.
Just a mere 5 or 6 days in the federal institution, and being threatened and being talked to like I was, and things like that. Well, those fantasies just came back bad, and worse than they were in the first place. So, like the psychological damage that it does when you're sitting in a little box, and it's not just that. But there's only a little square that people come open and look in at you, and that's all there is. And that really affects you. You just hate, and that's all you do. And you plot and plan how you're going to get that guy who threatened to throw paint in there while you were in there and set it on fire, and you think how you're going to get the people that were the victims in your crimes, but you do it all fantasizing, you know, that you're going to do this and that to them, you know, because they find, you know, you got it because of them, and it's just as much their fault as yours, and you suffered through the crime the same way they did. Like, none of it makes any sense. It's not logical thinking, but the whole thing is it's all based on hate, anger, and hurt, and being desperate and alone.
I don't think an eye for an eye is right, not dealing with mental illness, because mental illness is something that the public doesn't understand. It is a sickness, and it's like, you know, if I had my choice, I'd get the measles, but I don't have my bloody choice. I'm mentally ill. I'm sorry for what I did, more than sorry for what I did.
The need for love, attention, and a lot of guys can't describe that, right? Or can't express that. They hold that in, and that's where a lot of problems are caused. They can't talk about their feelings and emotions.
We're more concerned about a first-class hockey player than a first-class mother. That's wrong. That's crazy.
I just want to do the things that I've always wanted to do, and I've never really had the chance to do them all.
Although its facade resembles the traditional prison, it becomes obvious to those who speak to anyone, patient or staff, connected with Oak Ridge, that the system at Oak Ridge is unique. Its people have hope, and it obviously works through therapeutic rehabilitation and not through punitive measure.
You think you know me pretty well, but how can you tell? You never get inside my head. The times we talk, we never speak. We play hide and seek. So many things are left unsaid. Why can't you see what's on the other side of me, the side of me that reaches out to you? Sweet thoughts and dreams, like drops of rain on rippling streams that wind and bend, rivers with no end, flowing on the other side of me. On the other side of me. On the other side of me. On the other side of me.
The patients don't deteriorate here, and I think people do in prison.